Hello, I'm Stephen Childs of virtualvoicelessons.net, and I would like to welcome you to part 2 of our series entitled Increasing Your High Range Falsetto. As I mentioned in the first lesson on this subject, there are several parts to developing a high range, and for us as singers, one of the parts is vocal cord strengthening. Strengthening the vocal cords is one of the most advantageous outcomes of working with falsetto, because having weak vocal cords means an overall weak voice and an inability to sing high notes altogether. Now, the word falsetto simply means false voice, but don't let this term fool you, because as you will see, falsetto is used quite often in both classical as well as contemporary voice. A classical soprano uses falsetto as their primary voice and is one of the features that makes a classical soprano sound classical. For us as contemporary singers, falsetto is used in songs for one of 3 things. Number 1, it's used as an ornament to contrast or highlight a phrase or word in the song. Number 2, it is used for high soft singing. And number 3, when mastered, can be used for high strong singing that sounds exactly like the low voice in tonality. Having a developed falsetto is also the key to singing through a sickness or through allergies, because it can promote blood flow in the vocal cords and reduces swelling. The falsetto makes the vocal cords strong in an area that sicknesses and allergies often weaken. Now, I would like to explain a little bit about the vocal cords before we dive into the actual exercise of them. First of all, the vocal cords, or vocal folds as they are sometimes referred to, are actually a pair of loosely hanging muscles that are wrapped in a thin membranous tissue. On average, the male vocal cords are around 3/4 of an inch in length and around 1/2 of an inch in length in females. The thickness of the cords are around 1/8 of an inch. Now imagine for a moment, all the singers that we have been impressed with over the years, the strength in their voices, the emotions that they use, all of that comes from something that is roughly the size of a dime. It's amazing that something so small can generate so much power. But this is why, to me, the study of voice is so awe-inspiring. Now, directly above the vocal cords lies another set of shorter folds known as the false vocal cords. Now, I do not want you to think that just because they are called the false vocal cords, that this is where we get our falsetto voice from. The false vocal cords themselves do not produce much of any sound. What they do is cause an embouchure effect, similar to the way a trumpeter's lips are fitted into the trumpet's mouthpiece. Without this embouchure effect, it would be impossible to achieve the same depth and volume for our vocal cords when incorporated with the false vocal cords. Here again is a natural occurrence found within singing that has been imitated by instrument makers of the past, again showing thoughtful design. As you probably know, it is our air that sets the vocal cords into vibration. And as we learned, it is vibration that makes sound. Whether or not it is the vocal cords themselves that produce the vocal sound has been debated over the years. Some believe it's the actual cords. Some believe it's the air surrounding them. It seems to me that it's the different layers within the folds as well as sympathetic vibrations of air molecules surrounding them that create sound. In either case, it's truly amazing that sound is produced at all. After that point, it is the resonators of the mouth and face that adds to the vocal sound and gives us the beautiful voices that we all love. Now, here is where falsetto becomes so important to us as developing singers. Because of the fact that the vocal cords are actually comprised of muscle tissue and ligaments, the vocal cords themselves can be exercised. And as you will see, it is falsetto that exercises them in a way that benefits us most. Most of us recognize a person's falsetto voice by its characteristically thin, soft tonality. And that is true for the most part, but believe it or not, all the high, strong singing that we hear from artists like Steve Perry from Journey to Mariah Carey is in actuality still a form of falsetto, even though it may not sound like it. This is what we call mezzo falsetto, or a mixed voice. But most people recognize this as the belt voice. Again, all the impressive high, strong singing that we hear both male and female singers perform is in actuality still falsetto. And we will cover this topic in another lesson in our high range series on developing the belt voice. If you were to look down a singer's throat as they were singing in their natural voice, you would see their vocal cords vibrating basically like this. Now, of course, it's vibrating so fast that in actuality it's very difficult to directly observe. But the point being made here is that it's the whole vocal fold itself that is being set into vibration when we are singing in our natural voice. The same is not true when it comes to falsetto. It is only the edges of the vocal cords that are being set into vibration. This is the reason why falsetto sounds the way it does. It sounds thinner because less of the vocal fold is vibrating. Again, here is your natural voice, and here is the falsetto. Now, if it is only the edges of the vocal folds that are being set into vibration during falsetto, then this is obviously the part of the folds which are exercised the most when doing falsetto. And this is incredibly important in overall singing. So in other words, the more falsetto we do, the stronger the edges of the folds become. And this is precisely what we need as singers, because weak vocal cord edges means less ability to hold back air pressure and a higher rate of cracking one's sue when going for higher notes. It's like the analogy of a runner who has very strong legs but weak knees. What advantage is strong legs for the runner if the knee joints that connects them is weak? As they say, a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. If the vocal cord edges are weak, high singing becomes far more difficult, if not impossible. You see, falsetto is the key for high singing. And not only this, you will find an overall improvement even in the low voice, because falsetto encourages better overall vibratory ability in the vocal cords as a whole. The better the falsetto, the better the vocal folds vibrate. This is actually one of the advantages that classically trained sopranos have over those who are not trained in voice. To work on falsetto the amount that they do is a great thing for the vocal cords, which again is the engine behind the voice. So just like the classical approach, we as contemporary singers must spend time exercising and developing our falsetto voice in order to achieve better tone as well as increasing our higher range. In order to get the most out of your falsetto exercises, there are a couple of areas that need to be addressed. The first of these is called singing on the breath. Now, this is an older term that seems to fit this particular technique nicely. Singing on the breath simply means that we are to remove all breathiness from our voice. To use the air rather than wasting it is the answer. When we are singing breathy or airy during our falsetto practice, we are actually cheating ourselves. It would be like lifting weights at the gym with someone holding them up for you. Even though you're doing the exercise, there is no real work involved in it. You see, when you are singing breathy, you're not fully engaging your vocal folds. There's a gap between the folds, which is allowing air to escape, thus preventing the folds from holding back the air pressure. And because of this, the exercise part of the training is non-existent. So what we need to do is sing on the breath, or in other words, make sure there is no wasted air. We need to make the folds hold back the air pressure as much as possible in order to add weights to our weight set. Now, a further advantage to singing with a non-breathy voice is that it does help us with singing songs as a whole. There are times when we are supposed to sing breathy and sometimes not. And often it can go back and forth many times within a single vocal phrase. So to be able to sing with a non-breathy tone is learning control over the vocal folds themselves. Another advantage is that uncontrollable breathiness causes friction and a drying on the vocal cords, which can lead to some pretty serious vocal health issues. To constantly have air rubbing against the edges of the vocal folds can be a leading cause of nodules, which, as you may remember, is a bump on the vocal cord edges. When this tiny cyst forms, more air is able to escape past it, causing more friction, and we start to fall down a spiraling staircase. Now please remember, I'm not suggesting that breathy singing is wrong. On the contrary, it is one of the most commonly used tools of expression in both singing as well as speech. What I am saying is that we need to be able to control breathiness. Uncontrollable breathiness is actually the issue here, especially in your falsetto exercises, because we will get the most out of the exercise when we remove all the wasted breath. Now, the way that we remove the breathiness is to simply press the vocal cords together tighter. The problem is, most of us cannot just do this at will. We need to take a backdoor approach to sealing the vocal cords up. Let me give you an illustration. If I were to ask you to lower your diaphragm right now, I would guess that most of you would not be able to do this because we do not have direct control over this muscle. Yet, if I asked you to inhale, you would then, without a doubt, lower your diaphragm, because this is how we all breathe. And this is what I mean by a backdoor approach. Now, for the breathiness in the voice, one trick that I often suggest is to place your hand about 1 or 2 inches away from the front of your mouth. And when you are singing in your falsetto voice, try your absolute best not to have any air touching your hand. When you do this, your brain will tell your vocal folds to press together tighter. This approach works almost immediately for most people. The next step after this is to remember the feeling of singing non-breathy. You will notice that the voice will greatly increase in volume with no additional work, and it will feel right, as if something locked into place. There will also be an increase in overall fullness of your tone. So remember, when you're practicing your falsetto, it is imperative that you do so with as little wasted air as possible. Now, the second approach in practicing your falsetto is to sing with a relatively strong voice. Now, I am almost tempted to tell you to sing as strong as you can, but I'm afraid there will be someone who pushes way too hard and accidentally hurts themselves. But hopefully you get the point. Do not approach your falsetto thinking it should be weak just because it's falsetto, and don't push so hard that the vocal cords blow apart. Again, add more weights to your weight set by singing your falsetto exercises strong, but be mindful that we can hurt ourselves by trying to use heavy weights too quickly. The combination of singing on the breath and singing with some volume will cause you to actually exercise the vocal cords correctly and in turn bring you to your goals much quicker. I am Stephen Childs of virtualvoicelessons.net, and I would like to say thank you for listening and God bless.